Thank you, and appreciate everyone joining for this call. Very excited to walk through a beginner's guide to performance marketing. One thing that I will note up top as well is that this isn't going to be a sort of like meticulous guide through the ins and outs of the ad platforms, more so an overview of how to think about performance marketing in the context of crowdfunding and some of the nuances that that funding model presents. But before I dive in, just a little bit about me. Hello, I'm the general manager of and director of product for Kickstarter's performance team. And actually, I owe the start of my career to a successful campaign, Beast of Balance, that launched back in 2016. This was the first game I got to work on. And as a result, I've been in and around Kickstarters since the very beginning of my career. And the performance team is actually a dedicated performance marketing unit within Kickstarter, and we provide support on every front, from creative services, pre-launch marketing, as well as navigating the complexities of ad measurement and execution. We're still in beta, and we're working really hard to scale up the number of creators that we can provide, but we've had some amazing results so far with our limited beta. And sort of, why should you listen to me about this stuff? Well, I've got deep expertise drawn from these topics from years of crowdfunding consulting and also product development leadership at Niantic, particularly on Pokemon Go and Riot Games on Valorant and Legends of Runeterra. So the things that we're going to talk through today are, how performance can and critically can't support your campaign, setting goals and creating a plan for your campaign, as well as pre-launch marketing and building that confidence for launch, which is a critical phase, ways that you can reach your target audience and the way to define them, creative development, what's the best way to get that scroll stop and make sure that people do pay attention to your project and that it stands out. And lastly, I'll touch on how to measure your results and gather those insights as you go. So the place that I always like to start when talking with creators about performance marketing is that it's not a silver bullet. It's not the one-size-fits-all solution for marketing. And actually, there's some criteria that you need to have on your campaign in order to generate the most value from it. It's an accelerant. It speeds up things that are already working, but if you start spending uphill, you're going to probably run into some difficult challenges and costs. And the metaphor I like to, or simile, whatever it is, to explain this is think of a campfire, right? You need to have a critical mass of flame burning so that when you do pour on the gas, there's something to ignite and then things take off. If you've just got some smoldering embers, pouring on gas generally isn't going to be able to achieve the results that you're looking for your campaign. And there's a couple of indicators that I always recommend that creators focus on first before then looking to execute significantly or at scale with their performance marketing budget. And the first of that is make sure that you've spent time building your audience already. And this will go into a little bit more detail on this when we get into the pre-launch phase, but actually, and this is kind of hand in hand, you want to make sure that you have a product that resonates with your target audience well ahead of pushing go on your Kickstarter campaign. Building that core nexus of a community, especially if you're in games or an entertainment product, is really critical for accelerating your success over the course of the campaign, engaging your core community, as well as actually bringing new folks into the fold. So making sure that your product has traction with your target audiences. You can always evaluate this with small levels of spend, but I would really hesitate to focus on performance marketing as your key driver, especially if it's your first project or if you've got like smaller funding goals and ambitions. Another key piece that's really important to know before investing heavily into performance marketing is ensuring, and this is true for a lot of reasons, ensuring that your manufacturing costs are known and that you can affordably acquire new customers with ads. And that actually dovetails into the next point, which is having a large average pledge value is a significant advantage when working with performance marketing, because you're able, generally speaking, there's a little bit more cost that you can afford to acquire a customer. If you have a $20 product, a lot of that cost per acquisition is generally in the $10 to $20 range. So it's going to be quite difficult for you to acquire a significant volume of customers without having a meaningfully, high average pledge volume. Some other things I've heard a few times from creators and typically indicate that they need to spend a little bit more time thinking about their performance marketing approach is the following. So I'm only focusing on ads. I don't have time for other marketing. This is actually something I hear more often than not, because performance marketing can feel like it's an equation. If you just put some input in, you get the output out. But actually, the best way to think about performance marketing as a component of a larger go-to-market or marketing strategy, right? Press and PR can be very impactful, working with creators and influencers, and actually email and CRM, those are all really important pieces of a marketing strategy. If all you're doing is focusing on ads and new customer acquisition, your costs are going to get more expensive and it's going to be really hard to sustainably acquire customers. If you're willing to invest and have that be your jumpstart, that's great. But you need to bear in mind that, as to the previous point, performance marketing accelerates other marketing efforts elsewhere. Another piece that I hear sometimes is that I'll find out what resonates with my audience after launch, or, hey, I'm going to test and test and test with my performance marketing to see which sales points are most effective. That can work, and it's a really important signal, but my general advice is actually to be really empathetic with your target consumer, your target backer, and making sure that you're addressing and reaching them directly, rather than trying to be overly scientific about testing through a ton of those sales points as you go. You can get good signals there. They can be very useful. But the best indicator for a campaign success, in my experience, is being really thoughtful about what is going to excite your audience and what's going to excite your backers for your particular project. And the last piece is more about attribution, saying, I don't know which ads are working, but they must be doing something. Unless you're really meticulous in tracking that performance, it's really difficult to assume that they must be doing something. And I'll talk a little bit about the end about how to attribute those efforts more effectively. So how do you actually go about building a plan for performance marketing? What are the component parts to make sure that you set yourselves up for success, or even that you've accurately forecasted what to expect? The biggest question I get consistently is, well, what's your budget recommendation? How much should I allocate towards performance marketing? And I'll just walk through how I approach tackling that question. And there's a lot of inputs and lots of different things to consider here. Typically, for a project, you can expect to get 5 to 20% of your project raise directly from ads. And then generally, the return on ad spend range that I would suggest benchmarking against is 2 to 4x. Like that's expected and achievable. I think it's also worth noting here, there's lots of different ways to calculate ROAS, and this is using a more conservative measure. So if you've heard 7x or 8x ROAS, there are ways of measuring performance marketing impact that can get you to that number, but they are oftentimes a little bit inflated, and you need to be pretty thoughtful about how you're arriving at your ROAS figure. So with these two assumptions, right, between 5 to 20% of your overall funding raise and 2 to 4x, that's the best way to sort of break down what's your performance marketing budget going to need to be to achieve your goals. So if this is purely hypothetical, but I've used some nice round numbers for us to be able to do the math together. If you're looking at a $100,000 target raise, and it's reasonable to expect a 12% uplift for your performance marketing. And if you're looking at a 2.4x ROAS, that means that you would likely need to spend $5,000 to achieve $12,000 in directly attributable revenue, which then ends up being within the right range of that $100,000 total range. I'd also note that there's quite a lot of variability in what to expect, and every project is a little bit different here. But that's the best way to come at what your baseline assumptions and what your goals should be from a budgeting perspective. And if you're seeing great results, you can always scale up your budget and spend more for greater impact. If you're not seeing the results that you're hoping for, well, that's kind of one of the nice things about performance marketing is if the results aren't there, you can actually pull back budget and then see if you can allocate that to other channels that could be more effective for you. So that's the right way to sort of think about well, what's my budget? It's often quite performance dependent, but these are the right heuristics and benchmarks to at least get you to that initial spend. The other thing that I'd suggest adding on as well as a discretionary budget is that pre-launch ad spend that I mentioned. Generally, we recommend $3,000 to $5,000 for a large scale campaign. You can always pull that back, but it's very campaign dependent. I'm happy to answer some more questions about what are the sizes and things to expect in the Q&A afterwards. So what are the campaign phases of actually running ads for a Kickstarter campaign? There's a few key ones that are worth keeping in mind. The first one is pre-launch marketing. And the primary goal for you during that pre-launch marketing phase, I see that question. I will answer it briefly, but I'm going to try to keep all the questions at the end. Generally, I would say a large-scale campaign that can be really effectively scaled by performance marketing is upwards of $250,000 to $300,000. It depends. That's if you're doing a lot of user acquisition, a new customer acquisition. If you're focused on remarketing, there's impact that you can drive at lower spend levels as well. But that's generally what I would suggest as being very scalable, which may seem like a large amount, and that's something to bear in mind when you come to performance marketing. Is it's not going to take a $20,000 project and make it a $250,000 project. However, there are tactics that you can use to accelerate your campaign as you go. So anyway, that was a very good question. I can come to more of them near the end of the session. Pre-launch marketing. Building email lists and growing your following is a really critical phase to make sure that you can hit your funding goal and maximize your impact on the early stages of the campaign, or what we call the launch phase. And typically that's the first 48 to 72 hours. The main goal of ad spend during this phase is to amplify that launch beat, make sure that you sail through your funding goal. And typically we spend around 40% of the entire campaign's budget within that first 48 hours, which is why it's really important that you build confidence for that in the pre-launch phase prior. The mid-campaign phase, and a lot of people, it can be a bit of a trough and a slog. The main focus of performance marketing and actually any campaign efforts in that middle phase is to engage your current backers, make sure they're excited about the project. If you're doing stretch goals, being really excited and laying those out for backers as they unlock. And typically in that middle phase, we'd expect to spend 30% of your budget over a longer period of time. So definitely lower daily budgets compared to the launch phase. And then the final hours is a really good opportunity to drive urgency, recapture some of that remarketing traffic, and really drive that campaign to that the strong finish that we tend to see on the platform. One bit of advice that I do really want to underscore is don't launch too early. And I see this as the single biggest mistake for first-time creators who have large funding goal ambitions. When you are running a lot of ads towards your Kickstarter campaign, it's actually really critical that you fund within that first 24 hours, because pushing paid traffic to a campaign that hasn't funded tends not to perform very well. Whereas if the campaign has funded and you see and backers have that trust hook that they're likely to get the reward that they're pledging for, that tends to be a conversion driver there. So that doesn't mean necessarily that you should artificially deflate what your funding goal is. Make sure that your funding goal is set as the minimum amount of money that you do need in order to produce your product without losing money. But it's really important to just consider that in the context of what your funding goal is and what your target raise is, and be thoughtful about that. And the best way to build confidence for that first launch is actually to forecast your day one revenue from your existing audience. This could be your community of newsletters. This could be, page likes or social media following. Generally, newsletters are the best direct response community that you can build and own yourself. And additionally, as you build project followers on your pre-launch page, those can be really good inputs for forecasting, well, how much revenue can I expect based on the average pledge value that I'm anticipating for my campaign. I'd also really want to plug LaunchBoom here. They're a provider in the space and a team that we partner with closely, and they offer a suite of tools and resources for building up launch confidence, and have a really fantastic hands-on program for evaluating sales messaging and the messaging of your campaign well ahead of launch, so that when you do push that launch button, which is always going to be stressful. I launched my first campaign last year, and I was a bit of a wreck that morning, as I'm sure any creators on this call can empathize with. You can build that confidence and be a lot more predictable about how that first 72 hours is likely to go for your campaign. So let's talk a little bit about actually audiences and reaching your audience, and how at least I think strategically about defining them into different buckets. So typically, there's two types of audiences that you are trying to reach when you're running your performance marketing. Affinity audiences, So there's prospecting audiences. Those are new customers who haven't necessarily interacted with your product or your studio or your brand before. And remarketing, which is taking people who've expressed interest in your product or service, and reaching them with a message that's likely to get them to convert. On the prospecting side, there's a lot of different ways that you can reach and refine who your target customer is and how you reach them on digital ad platforms. The first is every large-scale performance marketing platform has things called affinity audiences. And those are typically interest-based targeting. So, hey, I really like running shoes and I really like crowdfunding. If you're running a shoe project, that's obviously a reasonable affinity audience to construct when running your ads against that particular audience. And typically, I also suggest that when you are building those affinity audiences, that you do filter and make sure that those individuals also have an affinity for crowdfunding rather than a general interest group. Basically, that's going to make sure that that prospecting audience is much more qualified, and you're likely to see better results from people who have experience with crowdfunding in the past. You can certainly cold prospect. I would recommend testing it. But certainly what we've seen is that by adding that crowdfunding filter, you're very likely to see a higher level of engagement and intent from the customers that you're acquiring. Demographic targeting is also really important to consider. If you just go really wide and you go worldwide, you're going to spend a lot of money on traffic that doesn't have the intent or buying power that you likely need to sell your product and to bring that project to life. So demographic targeting includes like geographic ranges. The US tends to be the largest markets. It's also a more expensive market, so bear that in mind. Generally, if you're just focusing on cold prospecting, focusing on the US is a very effective way of driving that. And then on age ranges, we generally recommend bookending your age ranges, so you're not just going after everyone. I'd say that 25 to 54 age range is generally the right focus. If your product is more focused on either end of that, feel free to drive that demographic targeting down. You know your customer better than anyone, and it's really important to have a good picture of that customer in your mind when you're building up these segments. And then lastly, this is something a lot of people come to me about and ask about strategies is lookalike audiences. And these are audiences that you can use a seed audience for, which then ad platforms will generate a lot of other similar profiles who haven't interacted with your business that you can then go and prospect against. The thing that is a little bit confusing is that you can create a lookalike audience of anything. It could be page likes, it could be your newsletter. And generally, I recommend only generate your lookalikes based on your paying customers. The reason for that is that's a much stronger signal of intent. And if you put a strong signal of intent into a lookalike audience, especially if you've got enough of those individuals, you're going to get a much higher fidelity lookalike audience than if it's a very broad set of people who've only taken a low intent action like liking your page on Facebook. So when you're looking at lookalikes, don't feel that you need to test loads of them. Really focus on the highest intent audiences as based on if they've purchased from you in the past. Remarketing. So there's a lot of different ways to take a potential backer's intent and bucket them into an audience and then reach them again. The most impactful and like most ubiquitous one of this is something called web remarketing, where you install a metapixel on any pre-launch landing pages and in fact your own Kickstarter page. And what that will do is it will collect page visitors over time that you can then create an audience based on that and then reach those backers near the end of the campaign when urgency and value messaging is going to be most resonant. You can also upload a customer list. And I talk about this as really maximizing the impact of your mailing list. Obviously, sending email, and email is an incredibly important channel for promoting your projects on Kickstarter. But not everyone opens that email. At the best case scenario, you're going to have a 35% open rate, sometimes more if it's a smaller list. What uploading that customer list to Meta allows you to do is actually reach those people who have expressed interest in your community in your projects elsewhere on the web. And I always recommend doing this as a means of, if you're going to do one small thing and you don't have a significant marketing budget, I would really recommend focusing on these remarketing tactics rather than your prospecting, because it's just a way to drive incremental value from high intent backers who maybe haven't decided to pledge in and of that moment when they hit your page. So that's just a general advice. If you don't have a lot of budget, remarketing is where you're going to get the strongest return on ad spend. If you have a lot of budget, you're going to need to do a mix of these two, because if you're just pushing it all into remarketing, you're going to saturate that audience very quickly and that performance is going to degrade. And then lastly, and this is something especially for creators who have a large organic following or tend to get a lot of engagement on those channels, you can generate audiences from your organic social content. That includes people who have either liked your page, have engaged, viewed any of your content that you've posted. That awareness signal, it's not the highest intent signal in the world, but it does allow you to at least channel that organic engagement into performance marketing intent audiences. That was quite a dense section, and I apologize. I do tend to speak quite quickly, so I look forward to answering any clarifications following the chat. Ad creative development. This is obviously another really important thing to bear in mind as you're approaching your performance marketing tactics. And I'll put some really beautiful creative that our partnered agency, Pulling Power Media, have provided, so you can get a sense of like what great looks like in the context of performance marketing ad creative. The sort of general tips that I would give for performance marketing ad creative is focus on square and vertical assets. Those will give you the most utility to all the different placements, stories, obviously the vertical placement, and then feeds, the square placement. And generally what I recommend is using creative pillars for testing. What does that mean? That essentially just means being really thoughtful about what's the theme or content of that particular creative that you're trying to test. It could be a sales point, it could be focusing on a product's art, it could be focused on a product's components. But just make sure that when you're testing an ad creative, that you're being consistent with what the key visual or key message is in both of those placements, because that is the most effective way when you're actually looking at the end to evaluate, well, which creative is most resonant, what's driving the most engaged traffic. I also recommend aiming for a mix of videos and statics. Videos obviously give the opportunity to really capture the potential backer's attention and give you a little bit more detail, as you can see in the bottom right of the screen here. But statics also are really effective for driving lower cost traffic to your page as well. So if you're just focused on video, sometimes that cost per click can be a lot more expensive than if you're just using statics. So using that blend will allow you to be able to effectively identify which ads within your creative pillars are performing the best. Generally, I recommend leaning into urgency and value messaging. Create a reason for that backer to click that ad and pledge now. You can do it through the terms of like Kickstarter exclusive items, like early bird offers and that sort of thing. But that stuff really does work, and it creates that urgency drive in a potential backer's psychology that like, oh, there's some scarcity here, I should probably click through. And then the last thing that I'd recommend is like, don't just focus on listing features. Though obviously features and functionality are really important. Think about the feel, the emotion, the sort of like imagined use of your product or project, because that tends to be a lot more of an emotional driver. If you're just listing features, that can be very good. That's sort of an intellectual like hook. But that emotional drive is generally what makes sure that the backer is going to hit your page with the most intent and excitement. So certainly if you're interested in if you need support with creative development for your Kickstarter campaign, highly recommend reaching out to Pulling Power. We work with them as part of our performance marketing services, and they do a fantastic job, and they have a lot of experience working on crowdfunding campaigns and projects. And the last sort of piece that I wanted to talk about with a few minutes that I've got left is measuring your results. And this is actually often one of the most intricate conversations that I have with creators, because there's a lot of different ways to measure your return on ad spend in the various ways that it's measured across the web and on Kickstarter. So the thing that's most important to understand is this idea of an attribution window. So some platforms have a really wide attribution window. And what that means is if someone clicks your ad or links there, or like clicks your ad there, the attribution window is how long until after they click their ad does that ad get the credit for that backing. And the more narrow the attribution window, the more likely it is that you're missing that extended attribution. But the wider that attribution is, the more likely it is that it's capturing credit for pledges that probably weren't directly caused or only lightly influenced by that action. So there's marketing attribution is an art and a science all to itself, but these are the two things that I really think it's worth being thoughtful about when you're measuring your performance on Kickstarter. The first is the metapixel. So the metapixel has what I would describe as the most generous attribution window, and actually it includes conversions on a one-day window of people who have just looked and engaged with the ad and not actually pledged. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand about the metapixel attribution window. Is it's not like it's a 7-day click, which means that if anyone clicks that ad and then pledges in 7 days, that gets attributed to the metapixel. But also if they view the ad in a day and then offsite go and pledge, the metapixel will attribute that ad. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's exactly the right way for you to measure your marketing performance. And there certainly is an uplift on awareness that's being driven by those views. But it's really important context, because if you're seeing a really high return on ad spend from Meta, well, that's likely wise because there's a much broader attribution window that Meta is using to attribute those pledges. And then on the more conservative side, and the way that I tend to optimize campaigns for driving revenue on Kickstarter is Kickstarter's custom referral tags. And this is definitely significantly more conservative compared to the Metapixel attribution, because the pledge must happen after that click within that first session in order for it to get credit for that particular click. And you might say, well, what's the right attribution? What's the true attribution? And true attribution is really difficult to measure with pinpoint precision in marketing. It's certainly the holy grail in this, and digital marketing, it makes it a lot easier than any other forms of marketing, but it's still not perfect. So the best approach that I recommend when evaluating the value of the ads that you're running is to take the range between that conservative measure and the generous measure, and your true ROAS, whatever true ROAS means, is somewhere in between those, and likely a lot more anchored towards that conservative figure for the means of spending more budget and thinking about how to derive like what your ROAS minimums are for a particular project. I could talk for a lot more about this. In fact, there's companies that have spent a lot of time and effort solving the problem of marketing attribution. And it's something that we are currently really looking at closely at Kickstarter to make improvements for how we do attribute pledges on the platform, and ultimately with the goal of making that clearer for creators to understand like what their biggest drivers are for pledge volume to their platform or to their project, excuse me. That's all the content, but I did want to just sort of finish with just a little bit of a few words about Kickstarter Performance, which is the team that I manage at Kickstarter. So holistically, we're focused on building new data-powered tools and services to maximize project success on the platform, and in fact, at all stages of the crowdfunding journey. Because we at Kickstarter definitely believe that there's a lot of different stages to bringing a project to life. And I think that we're really excited to be bringing much more support and features to all phases of that, rather than just the live funding campaign phase as we have in the past. And I'm sort of sad to say, but excited to share as well, that our performance marketing services are still in beta. And what that means is that we're working really hard to increase the number of projects that we can support. We can't take on everyone right now, but we are building tools and abilities to unlock and scale our services in the second half of the year. If you have a project that you think would be a good fit and has a lot of fit for performance marketing, you can apply for our beta. We have a form currently open on features.kickstarter.com. And actually on that side as well, you can see all of the other new features that we're bringing to life, so you can bring your projects to life on the platform as well. So I think that's everything from me. I hope that was helpful. Maybe the last thing I'd end with is, if you're looking for a specific guidance on how to set up ads, I think that there's a lot of tutorials and YouTube. That's actually where I learned a lot of these tactics back when I first started doing this, in terms of what's the right way to set up a campaign, all of those things. Yeah, definitely there's a lot of resources out there. I hope to produce some of those resources natively as well for folks who are interested, but yeah, so stay tuned there. Cool. So I think we can open it up to some questions, and really appreciate everyone's time this morning.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I'm not going to lie, I was actually taking notes for myself. I was like, I should know this stuff. Writing it all down really fast. So
well, you can ping me on Slack anytime, so don't worry.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and one of them is about pulling together those first day revenue. You said that you want to calculate your followers and turn them in. How do you work out when enough followers is enough followers? How do you know?
That's a really great question. So the best way to think about it is to think about all of the different potential followers that you have and apply a conversion rate to those different buckets and different intent. So if you've got a mailing list of, call it, again, I'm going to use small numbers here just so the conversions are easier for me to do on the fly. But if you've got 100 newsletter subscribers, typically what you would expect to see from a conversion rate on that is in the sort of 5% on the medium lower end, and 10% on the highest possible end. And a conversion there is someone backing, and you can use your estimated average pledge value as that, right? So probably somewhere in between your highest value pledge tier and your lowest value pledge tier. For Kickstarter followers, we tend to see by the end of the campaign between a 22 to a 30% conversion rate. Sometimes that can be far higher. I think it's really important to not fixate specifically on those numbers, on an individual number there, but always think about it as a range, because there's always a best case scenario and then a worst case scenario that if you just focus on a middle, you take a number as truth, you can really find yourself in a difficult position when some of those things don't come true. So if you look at basically, if you take all of your potential backers or people that you can reach with your marketing about your campaign, you apply a conversion rate to that. That then gets you your estimated number of backers. You multiply that by your average pledge value. That should give you a good sense of what that will then result in funding amount on your project.
Very well answered. That was quite a difficult question to
Sure.
answer without like writing it down.
I have to do that math quite a lot, so I'm used to
it. This question's actually been answered in the chat, but I think it's worthwhile just for anyone that's not reading it. Is there a way to create custom referral tags before the Kickstarter campaign launches?
I believe that you can. That is a feature that we've released. You go into the Kickstarter admin and then the promote section, and you should be able to create those referral tags before the campaign launches.
Yeah, and that's really important to do, isn't it? Just to try and make sure that you're capturing it all from the start.
Yeah, definitely.
Michael's asked, what do you charge for Kickstarter performance marketing?
Oh, totally. So we charge a fixed amount of attributed pledge value for Kickstarter Performance. Our rate is 15% of attributable pledges based on the referral tags in the Kickstarter dashboard. So very, very in line with what other agencies charge in the space. We don't have setup costs as well. So if you want to use us, you can just engage us directly. And we also provide creative services like with a fixed coat with Pulling Power Media as part of that service to make sure that we can really bring your project to life offsite while you focus on making sure that it's alive on site.
That's great.
One other maybe quick note there is that we charge a percentage of spend during the pre-launch phase as well, because there's no pledge value to attribute, so we just charge a percentage of spend during pre-launch.
Are there any competitive advantages that performance marketing has, being a team inside of Kickstarter that gives it an edge versus using JLOP or BackerKit external marketing?
Totally. The best way that I would answer that is that, you know, Kickstarter has been the nexus of crowdfunding and therefore has a significant amount of first-party data that allows us to then, you know, segment and optimize those ads, especially against our own backer base, far more effectively than other folks. We have all of the first-party data that we can, you know, and we want to put that to work for our creators and make sure that we're segmenting that effectively. I think that, you know, certainly, you know, JLOP and BackerKit, they have effective performance. I think that working with Kickstarter Performance is really focused on a holistic experience for the creator, and we care about every stage of your success on the platform, and also do our best to ensure that the way that we interpret our results and give you the data to make informed decisions is as accurate as we can. So yeah, if certainly if you're interested in chatting more about that, you should get in touch at Performance at. But yeah, definitely, like, you know, we're excited to be the best provider in this space over time.
This is a big question, and one that kind of speaks to two different things. Carl has in previous campaigns found that when he does backer updates throughout the campaign, that he loses pledges over time. That towards the end of his campaign, he's losing those backers, and he's curious as to whether or not that's directly related to advertised backers or if that's something indeed that everyone experiences.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that you do see, just as a natural amount and a natural behavior is backers will drop their pledge, especially as it comes closer towards the end of the campaign. They realize, hey, you know, I pledged for this, but maybe it doesn't make sense for me to back this. I'd be a little bit cautious about attributing that directly to ads and performance, because there's, with a lot of these things, there's like a critical mass of the right level of communication and the right frequency. But there is a sort of natural effect of, if you remind a large amount of your backers about your project, and maybe some of them during that time have decided that they no longer want to pledge, they'll drop their pledge, and that's like very natural behavior on the platform from backers. I do think that there's going to be a certain amount of just natural gravity there, but the best thing that you can do in that context is to make sure that when you are updating your backers, you're updating them with exciting, relevant information that's going to make them more motivated and invested in your campaign's success. But there is a certain amount of just natural churn that exists on any kind of platform there. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but if you do see it start getting out of control, there are levers that you have. You can reduce your update frequency. You can suppress your backers using the meta pixel from your prospecting audiences. But there is a natural amount that you should expect and anticipate there, I would think.
Tyler has asked another question. Tyler, did you mean Facebook ads? Are you focused solely on Facebook ads? Yeah. Are you focused solely on Facebook ads or other platforms? Where are those ads running? Is it from the creators' pages themselves, or is it from a Kickstarter group page?
Super good question. So we run ads across Meta Suite as well as the Google Suite as well. So Meta Suite includes placements on Messenger, Instagram, and Facebook, feeds, stories, reels, all those lovely products they've got, as well as on Google, which includes Google Search, Google Video, and Google Display. In terms of how the ads are displayed on Meta, we do utilize our partnered creators pages. So what that means is that we are able to serve the ad on behalf of that page using Kickstarter's Business Manager, and the backer experience is that they are receiving the ad from the creator and then pledging seamlessly through to the page. That's less of a problem on all of the Google channels except for YouTube, where YouTube will use, or the video channel, which is where they will use like the channel content of where that's hosted. The way that we work with creators there is that they upload the ad that we would use for YouTube to their YouTube channel, and then we just serve the ad and it serves through that page effectively. So the backer experience is always that it's coming from the creator. And I think that is generally the best approach.
That's great. Do you have advice on how to split the ads budget between different social platforms? Is there a preference?
I definitely think that budget, like media planning, is a really thoughtful piece. Obviously, you should be flexible with it, because if you see more results in one place or the other, you should allocate as you see. Typically, I would suggest sort of a 5-to-1 ratio between Meta and Google if you're running those ads yourself. The only other thing I'd note there is that within Meta, there's obviously lots of different placements. If you've got a small budget, I would focus on paid search. And if you're going to do any, sorry, I'm just jumping around a bit. For Google, if you've got a small budget, I would recommend focusing on search and then only really looking at remarketing for Google Video and Google Display. Google Video and Display for prospecting are generally not super efficient. I wouldn't describe this as like direct attributed channels, but they can be really effective for building awareness, especially if you've got folks who are already aware of your campaign and maybe need that extra nudge over the line to pledge. On the Meta side, typically, I actually think that Meta does a good job of distributing those placements programmatically. However, I would, if you want to be really focused and you do have a very small budget to allocate, I would recommend really suppressing anything that isn't feed placements, stories placements, or reels placements. Those are typically the richest media that you can serve and will have the most impact to your campaign. And that's right, Dominic. Yeah, Google Video is YouTube. They do have other video networks that exist within there. So sometimes your ad will serve off-site, but there's ways that you can filter that just in the ad platform itself.
And it all comes down to your audience, doesn't it? So like you were saying, be flexible with what you're seeing when you see the results. You can switch things on, switch things off. It's technical language, that switch things on, switch things.
I mean, that's what the buttons are like platforms. So
but you can, it's about really understanding who your audience is, and ads can help you do that. Do you when you're doing pre-launch, do you test different creatives, test different content? Is that like a process that you should go through before you launch fully?
I definitely would recommend it. I think that as much as you can build those learnings ahead of the campaign, the better. I do think that ads are only really one avenue of validating whether or not your messaging is resonant. But obviously, it's the one that you can scale up most effectively. Typically, the way that the sort of hierarchy of testing that I recommend is that you test your audiences first. That's like the biggest, most impactful criteria that you should be evaluating. And then from that, you can test your visual creative. That's the thing that appears like in the feed. And then within that, you can test your copy. So if you don't have a substantial like testing budget, the best way for you to sort of like identify what's going to be the highest intent audience is at that or the highest impact ad unit is by testing the audience first, and then visual creative, and then copy in order of impact.
That's really interesting. It's always so. I think that's the bit. I think when you're serving ads as an individual creator, is the scary bit, because it feels like there's so many different elements to it. Sorry, so there's another question here. How many projects within the performance team do you hope to support at one time?
In one way or another, I hope to support every project that's a good fit for performance marketing. In the short term, we're looking at supporting, in the hundreds of projects. At least as far as is our goal for the end of the year. So, the thing that we want to avoid is scaling too quickly, because if we focus too much on scaling too manually, we're not going to have the ability to build build tools to allow us to serve as many creators as possible. So I would probably think about the Kickstarter Performance managed service as a service that's going to be quite limited to start. But one of, as I noted about performance, is objectives and goals is actually to build tools that enable all creators to be able to leverage the tools at their disposal. We've got a lot of ideas and things that we're working on planning for releasing in the not too distant future. But definitely our beta phase is going to be quite constrained, but that doesn't change the fact that I want to be able to support every creator as best I can. And Kickstarter's goal is obviously to make sure that everyone succeeds on the platform. So it's definitely going to be smaller scale to start for now, but my goal is to increase that meaningfully.
And I'm assuming the sort of requirements for you is the kind of what you listed there, like things that are good for performance, which are going to work well, perform well.
Yeah, no, I'd say that a good criteria is that if you have a pretty large existing base already, I think that's a really good indicator, not just for working with us, but just generally, hey, that means ads are going to be more effective. Yeah, generally along that type of line, it's experience with the platform, and it's also having dedicated marketing budget to be able to spend and learn against.
And Dominic's asked, just to take us back to sort of testing, copy, and creative, you would test the exact same assets and copy that you would use later for the actual campaign when it's live?
There's nuance here, right? Because obviously the call to action in a pre-launch phase is, sign up to learn more. So outside of the direct call to action, you probably don't want to invest in a ton of really expensive key visuals that are formatted for ads. But be thoughtful. The way that we approach it on the creative side here is that you have a key hero asset, which could be a piece of animated art. It could be like a really close-up, beautiful shot of your components. Think about ways that you can use that asset and update it depending on the phase of the campaign that you're in. So the only thing that I would recommend and would steer clear of is, optimizing assets isn't about finding the one singular winning variant and then serving that forever, because what that means is your backers are likely just to see that single asset again and again. And having the sweet spot, I'd say, is 2 to 3 different variants at any given time, or ad creative, because that's going to reduce ad fatigue rather than just seeing, hey, it's that same static that I've seen all the time. I can't remember the exact. There's. I wish I had the stat to hand, but basically, we can all, as humans, we've experienced this. If you see the same ad on a lot of different sites, you just sort of go a bit ad blind to it, and you just stop looking at it. So, being really thoughtful about saturation, as Valor says in the chat, is really critical. And the way that you can combat saturation is to have variants and have those be running in parallel for your audience.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else have any other questions for us today? We have about 5-10 minutes left, so please get them in. Okay, are creators paying for the ads as they go, hooking up a credit card like Jellup does, or are they charged at the end? That's a performance marketing team question.
For the managed performance marketing service, Kickstarter actually will take that ad spend upfront, and then we will invoice you after your campaign is finished. So the invoice that creators who work with performance would receive would be the ad spend up until that point, and then the attributed pledge fees on any attributed revenue.
Thank you. Thanks, Tyler, for all your questions.
I can see, Tyler, that you've been around the block here, perhaps.
Tyler's famous. I know. I was like, "Are you the Tyler?" I was gonna say this just so everyone knows that this is recorded. So if you missed anything, if there's anything you want to go back over, we are recording this and we will send it out to you alongside some other useful links. So if there's any questions that you want asked that you haven't thought of just now but come to you later, you can get in touch with us at a later date and just let us know what your questions are. Okay, I'll give you another couple of minutes in case you're typing frantically. That's great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a really, really, really incredibly informative session. I really enjoyed it myself, selfishly.
Well, that makes me very happy to hear it. And thanks everyone.
Yes, as I said, everyone will send you an email and you'll have more information coming up. So yeah, keep in touch and we'll have another session at the end of July around late pledges again. So if that's interesting to anyone, we'll send you the details of that as well. So take care and good evening, good morning, have a good day, wherever you are. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Been a pleasure. Bye now.